Hey friends, welcome back. Let's go another mile, take a look at another signpost. I'm here in San Antonio, Texas. I'm in my garage and it is snowing, which is such a great backdrop and such a rare thing for us here. I just wanted to capture this. And I've got my solo stove here. It's not really keeping me warm, but it is creating some beautiful ambiance. So I've built this signpost here and we're gonna develop this idea, this understanding of the journey one step at a time. And so if you can see here, what I've done is I'm going to start creating a card for each of the signposts that we look at. The first one is just understanding the story that we're in, using the word redeem and the fact that there is a father who has a house and that he's redeeming back into the house those things that were compromised, lost, or stolen. And then the second picture or signpost is this invitation, this metaphor that God uses to describe sons as arrows. We're going to see how that develops. And the third picture comes from a saint named Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, or Saint Bernie. I heard this from John Eldridge years ago, and it's really stuck with me. So Saint Bernard of Clairvaux described the journey of humanity as it was intended by God to develop in 4 stages. And you got to look at it by asking the question, what does humanity do in this step and why does humanity do it? So in the first step, humanity loves the self. And why? For the self. Makes sense, right? We don't know that we can trust anybody or anything else. So hopefully what happens is we come to the end of ourselves. We realize that we're flawed, that we have limited resources. We begin to think about what happens on the other side of our last breath. We come into a conflict with ourselves because we see somebody else who has some source of life that we, in competition with the rest of the world for our own self-care, we haven't been able to meet that need, and so we look outside ourselves for it. So we begin to look to God, and we begin to love God. Why? For the self. Because it just seems like that's what's best for us. Like, if I'm going to survive, then I'm going to trust that I actually need God. So we reach out to Him. Okay, that's the second step. Many of us, unfortunately, never develop beyond that. I was reading a book by a man named Richard Rohr, and he described that in the masculine journey, you can get young boys, teenage boys, and they're actually in love with the idea of being in love, but they have to grow beyond that. You can't actually love God until you have a relationship with Him, and that relationship has to be based on something. So we can't just love an intellectual idea. Unfortunately, many people never grow out of that. So the obstacle here and the obstacle here are different, but there are definitely obstacles between the two that we have to jump over. Okay, so once we love God for the self, God asks us to do something that feels soul-killing. He says, I don't want you to do what you want to do anymore. I want you to do what I want you to do. That's why Jesus says, he who loves me will obey me. So if we move and jump over that hurdle and we begin to love God and obey Him, we begin to discover that God's actually stunning. So the third step is we love God. Why? For God. We begin to understand that He's absolutely amazing, that He's trustworthy, that He's faithful to His word. We begin to see, I know that in my own experience, it took me years to begin trusting Him, but once I began to trust Him, I saw Him come through time and again, and I saw that His wisdom was far greater than mine. And that is something that a real relationship can be built upon. And then the last stage is that we love the self. Why? For God. Very few people actually get there. That is what we're aiming for. And to kind of summarize this whole thing, Jesus said in John 10:10, the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come that you may have life and have it to the full. I think that captures the essence of all this. We're going to stop right there, and when we come back, we're going to develop this more. All right, we'll see you next time on the ancient path, the narrow road to being sons.